Hey everybody, welcome back to the Nidus Anarchy series. I'm your host Adam from Nidus, and today we're going to be talking on a high level of federation. What is it? Federation, it seems like something that's very kind of commonplace in the identity access management world, and I just kind of assumed everyone already knows everything about it. And so it's like, oh, should we talk about IDPs and SPs? Like, no, everyone already knows that. Well, today, on a client side, I found out that absolutely not everyone knows it, because I had to help troubleshoot some guys that were trying to set up a SP-initiated login where they were the IDP and they wanted to connect in with the SP with some third-party provider. And as I'm trying to troubleshoot all this information, they're showing me all this setup, and I'm like, wait, you have this whole thing set up as if you're going to be the SP. And they're like, yeah, we're the SP. We're the ones that are going to authenticate the users. And I was like, oh, well, figured out why it's not working. You have the whole thing backwards. Your IDP, the identity provider, that's the one that does the authentication. So that's why I found out not everyone really knows this stuff. So, hey, let's take a second and let's just talk from a really high level. What is federation and what are the key components and how do those things kind of work together? So federation is when you have a kind of the old school terms like circle of trust, when you have a trust set up between an entity that's going to do the authentication of a user. It's going to do the username, password, and validate that they've given proper credentials. And then you're going to have another entity where they're offering some type of a service like a website or something that someone can log into. And those two things work together through federation to do a login into that service. So the entity that's doing the authentication is referred to as the identity provider, or the IDP. So they're doing the authentication, and then whoever the applications that you're trying to log into or use, that is the SP, which is the service provider. So you have your identity provider and your service provider. So when someone tries to log in to the service, they are then redirected to the identity provider to log in with their credentials. And then once they're logged in, they're sent back to the service provider with a token that says, hey, I've already validated this user. And then that service provider says, okay, you've already validated that user. I want to let them in. And then they get into the application. The easiest way to describe this is just think of like when you go to any website and someone says, hey, log in with your Google account or log in with your whatever account, right? You're not logging in with that particular service. You're signing in with something else. So what's happening is that's considered an SP-initiated login because you're initiating login from the service provider, from Gmail or whatever you're trying to log into. Or not Gmail, that'd be a bad example, right? So like Salesforce, right? You're trying to log into Salesforce. Salesforce, you click on the login with Google button. You get redirected to that Google login box where you log in with Google. So Google's the identity provider, so they do the authentication. And then they send you back to Salesforce saying, hey, this user is authenticated, and here's their username. Then Salesforce says, okay, cool, and now you're logged in. So that would be a SP-initiated login. And then there's IDP-initiated login, which would be you start out at Google and you log in and then say, hey, I want to go to Salesforce. And you click the Salesforce button, and then you're sent to Salesforce with that token, and Salesforce already knows who you are and logs you in. So there's the IDP, the SP, and you can initiate login from either side. What's really happening under the hood, it's nothing too crazy, but there's three different types. You have SAML v2, which is kind of the original. Well, there's also Liberty Alliance, but no one uses that really anymore, so we'll skip that one. Then you have OAuth, and then there's OIDC. So that's kind of the order, the natural progression of how these different authentication federation mechanisms kind of evolved. So in SAML, OAuth then built on top of SAML, and they added more of an authorization around it. Actually, OAuth was never actually meant to be an authentication system, but purely for authorization. That's where you're supposed to allow, and they give you the little buttons of, hey, do you want to allow them to view your profile, allow them to update your stuff, allow them to do whatever, because you're giving them authorization to do things on your behalf. And then OIDC was built on top of OAuth. It wrapped OAuth around, and then that really added in the authentication bit. So the most modern form of federation login is using OIDC. So you're going to see that pretty much as the de facto for newer applications. But SAML is the one that's pretty much the baseline that everyone needs to support to handle any type of federation or any type of federated login. So that's pretty much the basis of it. The kicker is you really just need to know the difference between an IDP and an SP when you're setting this stuff up. Because if you set up the wrong one, obviously nothing's going to work right. Now, how this communication works under the hood, it gets really technical from there. But on a high level, let's just say this. Each identity provider and service provider, you're going to set up metadata that you're going to share with each other. So then that metadata is going to say what's the URL to access, this particular application, and it's also going to include your certificates. So when you share those certs, you're going to sign the message with the other person's cert. So this way, when the message gets sent over, that token that says, hey, I've already authenticated this user, when that service provider gets that message, that SAML assertion, they can say, oh, yes, because you've encrypted it using our token, we can validate that you've signed this message using our cert. I know it's you. I can trust this message. And now inside there, it says that this user is adam@nidus.com. So I can trust that that user is authenticated and that it's coming from an authenticated party. So it's using certificates under the hood to handle everything through these assertions back and forth. If you want to look into Federation, you're really interested, there's a ton of information out there. I mean, I'm sure YouTube and Google has a plethora of information how this works. All the products, pretty much every vendor out there has a Federation product that's out there that uses these things. And most apps have this stuff built in just to work right out of the gate. So if you're like, hey, I'm using Okta and I want to sign into Salesforce, and they're like, oh, just click and here's how you can set up the integration. You're doing Federation under the hood. So Federation is the key component for that single sign-on across all sites around the web or in the intranet as well for enterprise applications. So for those of you that are just learning a little bit about Federation, I hope this kind of sheds some light on it. There's a ton of information out there to learn more. Maybe we'll go into a little bit more information on this. Also, if you go to nidus.com on our blog, there's a ton of articles that have very in-depth, detailed information about Federation if you're curious. So feel free to check that out. Otherwise, check us out on YouTube or LinkedIn for the videos of these podcasts. And we're also on Instagram, TikTok, all those fun things, Nidus IAM. And you can hit me up directly if you want to, adam@nidus.com. I'll answer any Federation questions you got. This stuff's always fun for me, and I'll check you guys around. Later.